The horizon isn't a limit, it's your playground. At Vibrance Academy, we bridge the gap between cutting-edge technology and timeless artistry. Learn to navigate the air and capture the extraordinary from above. Vibrance Academy of Creative Arts. The sky is no longer the limit.
The boy's hands moved through the gray light of early morning, each finger finding the familiar texture of coarse hair and warm hide. The cattle shifted in their pen, their breath forming clouds that rose and dissolved in the cold air, the smell of them thick and constant, wet earth, manure, the sweet-sour tang of animal sweat. His fingers worked the rope, looping it through the iron ring, securing the gate for the long day ahead. Behind him, the village stirred. Other children moved through the same gray light, their figures emerging from doorways, from shadows, from the spaces between waking and the work that waited. A girl carried water from the well, the wooden yoke across her shoulders, the buckets swinging in rhythm with her steps. A younger boy drove goats toward the eastern pasture, his stick raised, his voice silent in the dawn. The school stood at the edge of the village. Its walls were whitewashed once, but the white had faded to the color of old bone, and the roof sagged in the middle where rain had weakened the beams. The windows stared outward like blind eyes, their glass long since broken, replaced by wooden shutters that remained closed against the weather and the indifference of those who passed. And no smoke rose from its chimney. No voices emerged from its door. The boy turned from the cattle and looked toward the school. His eyes traced the line of its roof, the dark rectangles of its shuttered windows, the path that led to its entrance and then continued past it, worn smooth by feet that had more urgent destinations. The cold air moved across his face, carrying the smells of the village, cooking fires, animals, the distant green of the hills, and beneath them all, the faint, dry scent of dust and abandonment. He walked toward it. His feet found the path, the packed earth hard beneath his worn shoes, the stones scattered across it catching against his soles. The school grew larger with each step, its details emerging from the gray. The crack in the wall beside the door, the missing step where the wood had rotted through, the lock on the door, heavy and new, its metal catching the first weak light of the rising sun. His hand reached out and touched the door. The wood was cold, rough with age, the grain raised in ridges that caught against his palm. He pressed against it, feeling the solid resistance of the lock within, the immovable fact of it. Through the gap between door and frame, a sliver of darkness beckoned, the interior of the school waiting in its perpetual night. A sound reached him, the rhythmic thud of hooves, many hooves, moving in unison along the track that led to the village center. The boy turned from the school, his hand dropping from the door, his body orienting toward the approaching sound. The cattle were coming, driven by men on horses, their voices carrying across the distance in short, sharp calls. The boy's day waited there, in the dust and the noise, and the endless labor of moving animals from one place to another. He did not move toward them. His feet remained planted before the school door, his eyes fixed on the approaching cloud of dust that marked the cattle's passage. The girl with the water buckets passed behind him, her footsteps quickening as she moved toward the village center, toward the work that waited. The younger boy with the goats had disappeared into the hills, his charges scattered across the slope like stones on a vast gray board. The cattle drew closer. The rhythm of their hooves grew louder, a percussion that shook the ground, that vibrated through the soles of the boy's shoes and up into his bones. The men on horses appeared through the dust, their figures dark against the rising sun, their faces indistinguishable at this distance. One of them raised an arm and pointed toward the boy, toward the school, toward the boy who stood before its locked door instead of moving toward the work. The boy's hand found the lock again. His fingers traced its contours, the cold metal, the hard edges, the place where the key would enter if there were a key, if there were anyone who cared enough to turn it. The cattle were close now, their bodies filling the track, their eyes rolling, their breath clouding the air. The men's voices carried, sharp and urgent, calling him toward them, toward the work, toward the day that stretched ahead like all the days before it. He turned from the school. His feet carried him down the path, away from the locked door, away from the shuttered windows, away from the books that waited inside in the darkness. Their pages never turned, their words never read. The dust of the cattle enveloped him, coating his skin, his clothes, filling his nose and mouth with the taste of the earth and the animals and the life that had been chosen for him. The girl passed him, returning from the well, her buckets empty now, her work complete until the next trip. She glanced toward the school as she passed, a glance so brief it might have been accidental, and then her eyes dropped to the path before her, to the dust, to the next task waiting. The boy reached the cattle, and his hands found their familiar places, the rope, the hide, the rhythm of the work that needed no words, no thoughts, only the body moving through the gray light of another morning. Behind him, the school waited in its silence. The lock held firm. The windows remained shuttered. And within, in the darkness, the books lay stacked on their shelves, their pages clean, their words waiting for eyes that might never read them, for minds that might never know what they contained. The sun rose higher, burning through the gray, and the shadow of the school retreated before it, pressing against the wall, pressing against the door, pressing against the lock that held the darkness in and the light out. The boy moved with the cattle, his body one among many, his feet finding the rhythm of the herd, his hands finding the work. The dust rose around him, thick and choking, and through it, through the haze of earth and animal and the long day ahead, he saw the school growing smaller behind him, its white walls fading into the glare of the rising sun, its windows blind eyes watching him go. He stopped. His feet ceased their movement. The cattle flowed around him like water around a stone, their bodies brushing against his, their hooves raising dust that settled on his skin, his clothes, his hair. He stood in the center of the herd, alone in the midst of their passage, and he turned to look back. The school was still there. The lock was still there. The books were still there, waiting in the darkness. Their pages never turned, their words never read. The men on horses called to him, their voices sharp with impatience, and the cattle pressed against him, urging him forward with the pressure of their bodies, the weight of their need. His hand moved to his pocket. His fingers found something there, small and cold, wrapped in cloth. They drew it out. A key, old and rusted, its teeth worn smooth by years of use, its shape familiar in his palm. The girl had given it to him months ago, pressing it into his hand in the darkness, her eyes darting toward the men, toward the horses, toward the work that waited. She had found it in the road, fallen from some pocket, dropped by some hand that had passed this way and never returned. The boy held the key in his palm. The cattle moved around him. The men called to him. The sun rose higher, burning away the gray, revealing the school in sharp relief against the brightening sky. The lark waited on its door, cold and patient, its mechanism rusted but intact, its teeth waiting for the key that might still turn them. The boy's fingers closed around the key. His feet remained rooted in the dust. The herd flowed past him, their bodies warm, their breath loud, their need urgent. And ahead, at the edge of the village, the school stood silent and waiting, its shuttered windows blind eyes in the growing light, its door a barrier between the darkness within and the day without.